Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to this exciting edition of Net in the Cloud. Today, we're talking about Bare Metal 2 Cloud. That sounds like fun. And I have a special guest today, Malcolm Metalka from Terra Team. What's up, Malcolm?
Hey Ned, nice to see you again.
Good to see you, sir. We've chatted on several occasions before about various infrastructure as code things, but that's not our focus today. We're actually going to focus on cloud migration. So I guess my first question would be, why are we talking about cloud migration in 2025? Wasn't that done?
You would think so, right? With how people talk about it, like if you look at Reddit or anything like that. And the truth is, there are a ton of workloads still on-prem, and that doesn't necessarily mean those people with those workloads are entirely on-prem. They might be hybrid or something like that.
Sure.
But it kind of depends on who you ask and what their business model is, depending on how much workloads are still on-prem. If you ask AWS, there's like 90% of workloads are still on-prem, so that shows how much they're going to grow. If you ask people delivering more on-prem stuff, it's much lesser on-prem. But yeah, there's a lot there. Like, not everyone moves at the same speed. There might be a bit of bias towards like new startups. Like, a lot of those definitely go cloud first, but there's a lot
Sure.
of long established companies that are maintaining their workloads on-prem for a variety of reasons.
That was definitely my experience when I was still doing consulting is even the most aggressive of companies that I would talk to, we're still keeping some stuff on-prem. Could be, branch offices, could be they had some applications sitting on custom hardware, whole bunch of different reasons it could still be there. Do you think those reasons have changed and companies are starting to migrate more? Is that sort of why you took the approach of writing an ebook, which we'll talk about later? Um, or has nothing changed and you're just still seeing a steady migration up to the cloud?
I think that to some degree things have changed. I mean, they're always changing in our in the tech world, right?
Hmm.
But the reason we wrote the ebook was we had a lot of customers coming to us asking for Terraform help. We want to
Mm,
do this.
sure.
And what it turned out to be was a lot of those were actually migrating from bare metal to the cloud. And they saw the Terraform aspect of it as the part they needed help with, but they actually were struggling to get the migration going all the way. So, and the reason that they were trying to do that is like a lot of times it's just speed, right? If you are managing your own hardware, if you start hitting capacity limits, you're in the multi-month cycle of getting those new servers, getting them racked and stacked, getting everything set up. There's also things around credentials or other API things that if you're in the cloud, you're just like, oh, I just create these IAM role and this person has access to it, or this or whatever. That is just not the same in the data center. So there's a lot of reasons that we see speed being the primary one, though. People just want, even if they have their production workloads still on-prem, they might be moving a lot of their dev workloads to the cloud
Hmm,
because they hire a new person and they don't have to do capacity planning. It's like, here's your AWS key, go to town.
sure. No, that makes sense. I watched a YouTube video recently, and the guy who put it together was making the case that the cloud is overly complex and expensive, and you should just self-host. And his opening gambit was, okay, I'm firing up this old MacBook I have, and I'm going to install Nix OS on it. And I was like, whoa,
Slow down, cowboy.
that's your opening gambit is you're going to install Nix OS. I don't think so.
And then 3 days later, once everything's compiled.
Yes, it was definitely faster. And well, that's the thing. And I want to get your take on this. Um, Cloud is expensive. Yes, but that's fine. You're paying for a service, right?
Absolutely. You're paying for the time that a developer is not sitting around waiting for something to be started. They can just go immediately. So I think a lot of, the things we measure, I mean, the things we focus on tend to be the things that are easiest to measure, right? So when you come with a line item that's like, this server costs this much, or this AWS bill costs this much, like, oh
Hmm.
gosh, that number's big. But what we don't necessarily think about is the opportunity cost. You had a developer that could only complete half their work that week when they could have completed all of that work, or maybe they were stuck for even longer or something like that. And that's not something that you see because you've already paid that in your head, right? You're like, I hired this person, that's what they cost. But you're not thinking about the time that they're just not doing anything, spinning around because they're just waiting for some other part of the infrastructure that needs to come up for them to make progress.
Yeah, and I would put that to the audience about their experiences setting up stuff locally versus deploying in the cloud. Because one thing that popped in my head as he's talking about, installing NixOS on something locally. I mean, I can't imagine a developer trying to do that, right? Um,
Yeah.
but the other thing that popped in my head was, well, you're comparing spinning up a virtual machine in AWS or Azure to running it locally on your desktop, or spinning up like ECS or EKS versus running some containers locally. That's not how I would deploy a website on the cloud. Like, doesn't it
Yeah.
require reconsidering your architecture?
Yeah, definitely a bit. And here's an example. Like, let's say you're using DynamoDB, a very fundamental piece of infrastructure at this point for a lot of people.
Mhm.
Can do some mocking internally around that to run it locally if you want to, but really at the end of the day, you're probably going to spin up like a little bit of a dev environment in AWS just to get the full, at least before you go to production, you want like the full end-to-end experience. You want to be able to debug certain things and all that. So there is some architectural things that when you go to the cloud, you might choose to use. And those are going to impact what your development cycle looks like, what your workflow looks like for development. And that like combination there is where you're going to spend the more money, like we said, possibly, but you're also going to be able to do things a little bit quicker, and you're going to be able to do things isolated as well. I
Mm.
remember at an early job I had, we had like a staging environment Postgres, and yes, only one CI worker ran that could work on it. But if you left that Postgres in like a broken state by accident somehow, then like every job after that was failing for a little while. And yeah, I know we should have like reset the Postgres on every run or anything like that. But that's like the type of mindset where you have the scarce resource because you have the like the scarce resources of your data center, where on the cloud you don't have to worry about that. Now maybe you do, if everyone's gonna have their own dev environment, you scale down like your RDS instance or whatever database you want to use, so you're not spending like the production money on it.
Mhm.
But that lack of scarcity, I think, is like a fundamental change to how people want to develop software.
That's a really good point. The most expensive thing in your company, or at least in terms of IT, is usually going to be your developers. They are the most expensive resource up to a certain point.
Yeah.
So maximizing their utility means it justifies spending on some other things.
Yeah. And you do have to be careful about certain things too once you're there, right? Like, if you leave some resources on that you forgot about, then those are going to be billing you by the hour, even though they're not used. So yeah, you
Mhm.
probably want some infrastructure on there to track things. When I worked at Spotify, there was actually an email that went out to you every week that they tracked what resources you made was connected to your username. And
Mhm.
they just said, hey, you have these running. We see like they're not being used that much. It's okay to use cloud resources, but it's not okay to waste them. So just be mindful of that. And that was actually worked really well. People were very thoughtful about it. They would go and shut stuff down. Like, oh, I just forgot about that. That's fine.
As someone who definitely struggles with focus, squirrel. I could definitely see me leaving a few things deployed in the cloud because I got distracted with some other topic or project that I'm currently working on. Um,
Yeah.
we had a nice comment here that cloud is more expensive than bare metal on-prem server, and I think that's absolutely right. That's totally valid. If you just buy and install a bare metal server and run it, chances are it's going to cost a lot less than running that same CPU, memory, and whatever configuration in the cloud on a constant basis. But like,
Yeah, I think that there is one variable missing there though, and that's utilization. So an early project I worked on was DNA sequencing technology. We wanted to analyze genes inside of DNA,
mm,
and it was very compute intensive.
Right.
But you would have a study going on and you want to do lots of compute. And when the study's not going on, you want zero compute. And we figured out that if we did the math, at the time, a few years ago, if you were not doing studies that needed to compute at least 60% of the year, you were losing money. So
Okay.
yes, that server was more expensive, but it was cheaper in totality because you didn't have to commit to buying a server for a year. We're only going to use it for 50% of the year.
Right. So let's assume, I'm an enterprise company or an SMB, and I'm considering the prospect of cloud migration. I've reached out to you and said I need some help with my Terraforms, but I also have some questions around migration. Where would be the first place to start?
The first thing is you want to do a little bit of risk analysis.
Hmm.
And really, it ends up being a pretty big project to migrate from bare metal to the cloud. And so you want to be careful you're not getting into like a whole system rewrite, which tends to go poorly for software, as we know. Just so many systems have just, died on the vine because they're still being rewritten. And you have to figure out, one, who's the stakeholders that I need buy-in from. That's really important because this is going to be a long and difficult process. Now, the benefits on the other side, you have to make sure that those line up with what your organization wants in the long run, but the benefits are real as long as you've made that alignment there. But it's going to be long and probably going to have some downtime along the way because we're going to make mistakes as we start transitioning servers from one place to another. So that buy-in is really important to make sure, even if you have a little bit of downtime, the organization still believes in what you're doing. I've seen some places fail because someone's like, we want to move to the cloud, and it's like a little team, and then they're trying to do it on a scrappy budget because they're not really getting the support they need, and then they have a little bit of downtime because of that same reason, and then the whole project gets killed because people get a little afraid of the stakeholders got a little afraid because they didn't really get the buy-in that they needed from those stakeholders. So a lot of it's risk mitigation. The primary thing, though, is if you think about what is hard to move around, right? It's not stateless HTTP servers or anything like that. You can just kill those and move them. It's your data.
Hmm.
And data is going to be something where we see you want to standardize how your data is managed on-prem as much as you can first. So when you start moving it to the cloud, it's just a repeatable cycle. So if all teams are on the same database, that's great. You can be like, okay, here's how we do a Postgres. We're going to do it first on a less critical system, make sure we have the process down, and we're going to expand out with more data, more critical systems. But as long as everything is standardized, you can do it in a fashion that is very repeatable, and you're going to be able to use the learnings from the previous one to make the next one go even better. And that also might require a little bit of refactoring of your data if you have it sort of in like a bunch of different setups locally. You might want to move them around to make them a little more standardized before you commit to moving that data around. But also, if you get the buy-in, like, no, let's just go. We are willing to take like a little bit of hit, and like as long as we can validate data on both ends there, then that's okay. So that's okay too. But it's really about what if the management's bought in for, what their risk tolerance is. And remember, data is going to be the one thing that if you lose it, you could be in trouble. And that is how you're probably going to have downtime.
Right. We had a good comment here. I asked the audience, what about a cloud migration was what worked, what sucked? And we got a comment here, discovery. Teams are not willing to share information. Is that something you've had to deal with, Malcolm?
Not personally on our side, since we're helping these other companies. But yeah, I mean, I think we've all worked at places where there's a little, there's a bit of politics. There's might be some people concerned about like, well, if we move to the cloud, does that mean like we need this thing that I've been working on? I worked on a team where we were managing all of the Cassandra databases for the company,
Okay.
and we wanted to move to GCP actually and just kill the Cassandra databases. And like we were into it, but we had great people around us that were getting us bought into the idea and making it clear that there's a future there for the team that was managing Cassandras as well. and we would just have to reskill a bit, which is something in the tech world. I think, like, we have a lot of churn in technology, so I think that's okay. But
Hmm.
I mean, this is where I think it really pays to have, especially leading a project like this, someone with a little bit of charisma, with a little bit of charm, who but also sees the vision and is on the side of trying to go to the cloud, but not trying to like force people's hands, but getting people bought into it and seeing what the future is going to be with that.
Yeah, my experience with cloud migrations, especially with teams that were reticent about it, is usually they were worried about what was going to happen to their jobs or their position if the cloud migration was successful. Like, does that mean my job goes away? Um, that happened a lot with backup and recovery teams. Where like, well, they're moving to the cloud, so that means I don't have a job anymore. Um,
Yeah, and I understand that fear, and I sympathize with it. I think the reality is, though, when you think about, like, yeah, like copying the data around is not the hard part on something, for
mhm,
example, like a backup team. It's actually making sure you can recover it and it works. And that's
for
all
sure.
like on the company side, right? Like you need a lot of process around that, a lot of validation, and the cloud's not they're giving you the tools to make that happen, but not the solution. And I think for all these things, you think about maybe like a network engineer at the data center. Well, actually, there's a ton of networking in the cloud. And I, as a dev, don't actually know anything about networking still. So those skills absolutely transfer over. Yeah, you might be using an API rather than physically putting some networking hardware in there. But you still have to understand how that works so you can help people that need to use the network be effective. So there's not it's not a replacement. It's more of like a transition, right? Where
Mhm.
it's all the same concepts that there. Remember, like a cloud is just a computer in somebody else's house. So like it's still a computer at the end of the day, and it still has to do all the computer stuff.
Yeah, what I discovered is you can just move your current architecture straight up to the cloud, and that's not probably not the best way to go about it, lift and shift. When you look at all the services the cloud has, you can do things that you could not do on premises, and to go back to, like, that backup and recovery admin example, like, they were doing a test once a quarter, if that, of their recovery process. And that's because they had to have ample room for the recovery. They had to have, target hardware to recover to. And what I showed them was, hey, if we use the cloud for this, I can create a bubble environment for you to do the recovery in anytime you want. So you can do recovery testing every month, every week if you really wanted to. And that was like light bulb moment for them. They're like, "Oh, wow. So next time I have an emergency recovery, I know my processes are up to date and I can actually recover the data." That's kind of cool. I turned what was a threat to like a tangible benefit for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that is exactly, I think, the mindset you need, especially if you're trying to get like a migration going within your organization. Like seeing all these things that feel like a threat and doing exactly what you just said.
Um, when you're re-architecting an application for the cloud, what do you think are the quick wins versus what's really difficult to do?
I think that so for situations I've been involved in hands-on, so all right, so a lot of clouds have like their own databases, right? We talked about Dynamo. There's like Spanner if you're on Google, and there's other ones. My experience has been for databases, stay on something that just your cloud provider is running an instance of for you. And if you want to switch databases after you've migrated, you can do that re-architecture then.
Mhm.
But don't try to change too much while you're moving, because that you're going to have a change where you don't really know if it works or not internally necessarily by the time you want to migrate it someplace else. And it's like, okay, we have a bug now. Is this because we're on the cloud or because of the new change we did? Um, Definitely getting dev setups going is
Mm.
probably an early and easy win, or even like staging environments or CI/CD. All those, if they don't work for a little while, like they're not like money being lost immediately, right? Like people might be slowed down a bit, but you can usually switch back over. Something that's stateless, you can switch back and forth over. So like, oh, it didn't work when we tried this, we'll go back to the on-prem solution and then come back once we think it's working. So definitely get like the dev workflows going, get the dev CI/CD, all of those, get a dev environment or staging or something like that.
Mhm.
Because those are just, they're not critical, but they're gonna like let you do end-to-end testing going forward.
I like that. So your steady state stuff that probably would be more expensive to run the cloud and you're not quite ready to re-architect. You leave that on-prem, but you can spin up these sort of more temporary ephemeral environments in the cloud and sort of nail down what that process looks like.
Exactly, and get a feel for how things actually work. Part of moving to a new system is also understanding, what are the failure modes? How do things work differently under stress than what I'm used to on-prem?
Mhm.
Like a common thing is that when you start getting too many requests on-prem, you're kind of like, if you're at capacity, you're at capacity, but on the cloud, now you can scale up. But maybe the sizing you've been using on things doesn't handle how you're going to scale up there. So if you can do like load testing and all that, you can start seeing what like, okay, now we're in this new architecture and everything is roughly the same, but is it really the same now that we've tweaked like this one thing, which is auto scale group or something like that?
Mhm. That's a really good point. One of the things that's really hard to do on-prem effectively is if you wanted to do like load testing, like external inbound load testing, you don't want to saturate your current network and break the actual production workflows. But if you stand up that environment in like a staging or testing environment in cloud and you direct the load there, you're not going to saturate the cloud's pipe. It's going to be fine.
Yeah, I should hope not, right?
I mean, who knows? Maybe you'll end up bringing down Cloudflare. I mean,
It can
it's already
happen.
happened once this week.
it,
Of course, that was a config change. So
it always is, right? It's always a config change.
that does bring up an interesting concern, though, and I'm curious to get your opinion on. We've had a string of cloud outages in the last month. AWS went down hard for
Hmm.
an extended period of time. Azure front door failed twice, bringing down some serious stuff, and then we had the Cloudflare outage just this week. How do you justify moving to the cloud when we have these massive outages?
There's a few ways to look at that in my head. One of them is that you can't talk about an outage without really talking about like what your SLA is, right? Or
Mm,
SLO, whatever the three-letter word letters are. It's
there's a
that
lot of
like what, yeah, but like what's the degree of service that you have to provide to your customers? And if that is within what you sort of expect, maybe your what your cloud offers you as well, then yeah, outages are going to happen. They're going to happen whether it's on your own on-prem infrastructure or on the cloud. Now, if you're on the cloud, you can take the effort to try to be multi-cloud. I think that hasn't been super successful for a lot of people, but it is something. If uptime is that important to you, you do have options there to be multi-cloud. And the more parallelism you have across vendors, the less chance you have of being totally down.
Mhm.
But like when I saw the AWS one, I was thinking, okay, yeah, 12 hours, that's pretty bad. Um, but are you telling me data centers haven't had outages for a long time around the world? I remember Hetzner, I think it was Hetzner or
It
OVP,
was,
one of
yeah.
these ones, had like a fire in the data center and they were just like gone.
Yeah.
So the AWS outage and the Cloudflare outage, I think the interesting story there is not, whether we should think about moving to a cloud or not, but I think it's that we're realizing that all these, like there's a lot of centralization there, and we should think about which cloud SLO that we want to tie ourselves to, or we want to span across multiple of them. And we can also run in a hybrid mode where we say, well, look, we're okay being bound to that SLO for certain components of our system, or maybe for our dev path or other things like that. But it's okay to say, we actually do want to stay on-prem for our core offering, and we want to use the cloud just to go faster on the dev side or testing side or these other things. Like that's totally reasonable.
Hmm.
And I think like companies like Oxide, which are providing these racks that actually have cloud-like APIs, so you can treat your on-prem more like a cloud. You still have capacity planning and all that, but now you're actually starting to get to the point where you can manage your on-prem the same way you would manage your cloud infrastructure. And I think that is really I don't want to say like a game changer, because I think a lot of people still are better off in the cloud. It's just like it's expensive to get these other racks and all that. But I think that changes the calculus quite a bit. If you're someone that can afford to have an on-prem rack with all this access, that is really valuable too. So like
Hmm.
APIs really change things for a lot of people. On-prem has been lagging behind on that quite a bit. And that is like why cloud has, such a time benefit there as well. Um, but there are people that have to be on-prem for either political reasons. There's this concept of like cloud, was it cloud nationalism, I think, where you have certain countries that are like, we'll use the cloud, but it can't be a cloud that like a foreign company owns.
Yeah, like sovereign
Um,
cloud.
yeah, that sort of thing. And like
Hmm.
that's fine. Like I understand why some organizations want to do that, some governments want to do that. You also have just some maybe some workloads that still like it's going to be too expensive. Like what your capacity is going to be, and you're like, okay, like our capacity is actually pretty like static over time, our capacity requirements. Like we don't have these things where requests go up with the sun and down, up and down with the sun. So
Hmm.
you're like, okay, we just have the same amount coming in 24/7. So like capacity planning is actually pretty easy for us. And since we're at that capacity, we know we're getting the value out of just dropping the cash for that rack. So I mean, like we said, the cloud is expensive. So if your use case doesn't require the flexibility and the scalability of a cloud, then yeah, it makes financial sense to stay on-prem. That's totally fine.
Yeah, I guess that's probably the key takeaway is you don't have to choose one or the other. It's not this yes or no, black or white kind of decision. It's weighing the different options and doing like a cost benefit analysis on what makes sense for your organization and your business goals.
Exactly. I think where I stand is, it's hard to do a cost benefit analysis where, it's hard to predict the future.
Hmm.
Um, so my personal recommendation is when in doubt, sort of lean towards the cloud unless you have a strong reason not to. You can always go back if it turns out not to be the right choice.
Hmm.
But when in doubt, the more like I really value something called optionality, which is when I make a decision, how many future decisions does it take away from me? And
Right.
cloud takes away very few future decisions. You go and you choose a cloud. You can always switch clouds. You can always change which database choices you make on there. You can always scale things up and down. You're like, okay, I'm going to choose this size machine. Turns out that I actually need a different size machine. Well, on AWS, since they separate compute from storage, you can just scale your machine up without having to move data around.
Right.
So all this optionality is really worth it. So make sure you don't need those options in the future, but if you don't know.
Right. Choosing cloud maintains that optionality, whereas
Yeah,
buying physical hardware, that becomes a sunk cost. And you're
exactly,
like,
exactly.
I have to use that. But yeah, once you know you have a steady state workload that's not going to shift a lot over the next 5 years, yeah, buy the rack. Let the gear
Yeah,
depreciate.
exactly.
I do enjoy, and this is like a soapbox of mine, that we're finally starting to move to where hardware and the other layers within the stack are now having programmable APIs. But there's still not a universal standard across the vendors on the management. We're moving toward
Yeah.
it in certain regards. I think there's a project called like Redfin or Bluefin, Redfish, Bluefish, One Fish, Two Fish. There's a few different standards out there for like baseboard management control, and like configuring RAID arrays and stuff, but it's
hmm
definitely not universal. unlike some of the standards that we have for, say, TCP/IP traffic. Like that's just a
Yeah.
standard that everybody adheres to. And I don't think we're going to have a fully programmable on-prem solution across all these different vendors for quite some time because there's not a ton of incentive for them to do it.
Yeah, and I think that so all right, let's take something that feels like it's standard, but it's really not, and that's like the S3 protocol. So
Oh yeah,
every
yeah.
cloud implements S3, but it's just like Amazon is like, well, we don't actually want to change it that much because it hurts us if
Hmm.
not everyone's talking the same thing. So we have that, and it's not a real standard, but it's good enough for what we want. Hopefully, there can be for treating your on-prem more cloudy. Hopefully, there's only a few APIs that have to be implemented there. That would be really great. I mean, we have different APIs with like GCP and Azure and AWS, and having a handful isn't great, but you can kind of hide behind some abstractions there for the most part, or you can be really thoughtful about these are the ones that I want to use. So it's not terrible. It's better than a lot of alternatives.
For sure. Well, I think we're coming up on time. I'm going to see if the audience has any additional questions for you while I'm waiting for anybody to type in a question or two. Um, I think the last thing I wanted to talk about was cost monitoring. So, some people think that I get a bill, it's gigantic, then obviously I'm doing something wrong. What's your opinion and approach when it comes to cost management and monitoring for the cloud?
So I think one thing that's really valuable if you're moving to a cloud, I mean, this comes from our background with managing IAC code bases, is
Hmm.
that IAC lets you integrate with cloud management, so you can get a prediction of roughly what it's going to cost to make this change. But then you can also track it over time to see if those things line up. And really, we think about it directional, like, oh, I've made this change to my IAC, so I know roughly it's going to be this order of magnitude. Um, so that's one aspect of it, is just having how you define the cloud, all your resources in a way that can be analyzed to give you some price information back.
Yeah, you can plug that into something like InfraCost or another tool out there, and it'll tell
Exactly.
you this architecture is going to cost you roughly this amount of money plus your egress fees and storage access costs.
Exactly. But that's only one half of of it too, is like we talked about earlier, there's people make resources then forget about them, or it becomes unclear why it's there, or maybe it's been over provisioned, right? And there's a lot of tools out there that will scan that and give recommendations of like, hey, we see like, this machine is only being used that much. Maybe you want to reduce the size of the machine, or maybe you want to set the minimum number of instances that can go down to even smaller because you're not
Mhm,
really making use of those. But at the end of the day, it does take some vigilance there.
mhm.
And I think, like everything, it's going to be a balance between, how much do I want to like, depending on what I'm using it for. If I'm using it for the dev case, how much do I want to like harangue my developers to make sure they're always shutting stuff down when they're not using it? And then how much is it worth it to just be like, well, like, at the end of the month, we'll sort of like, if we're going too much in the wrong direction, we'll come back and have a talk to people, or build some automation around like terminating instances faster, or whatever it is, something like that. So I don't think there's one size fits all. It kind of depends on what your goals are with using the cloud. Is it this dev case? Is it your production workloads you want to go there? Is it just that you want to be multi-region, and it's really hard to be multi-region when you're managing your own data centers, where on a cloud you can just spin up something across like the whole world. So it depends on those. I think you should, when you start your migration, you should do your best to try to make being thoughtful about cost part of your culture, and something where when people look at something, they think that when they look at how much something's going to cost, or how they're using certain things, that is a question they're going to ask themselves along the way. And if you can do that, I think you'll get a lot of success just letting people make the right decisions on their own. And then on top of that, maybe just have some monitoring there. We have one big customer that's migrating from on-prem to the cloud, and they actually have a whole department devoted to tracking costs. And
Hmm.
they're actually like phenomenal. I like when I first went into this, I was like, man, it's gonna be like some bean counters, just like, well, you went over, you left at 5 and it didn't terminate until 5:01 or something like that. But they're actually like so good. They have really good tracking on who owns what, either down to the team or some case individual.
Mm.
And they just gently come by and say, like, hey, this is what you're running. We've noticed this sort of stuff. Like, if that's okay, if that's what you intended, fine. But we just want to let you know.
Right. Raising awareness.
Yeah.
Uh, it sounds like if you're planning a cloud migration, or if you're curious about it, or you've already done some of the migration, you're planning some more, planning is the key word here. It requires sitting down, some strategy, some planning. And I understand that the folks at Terra Team and you have written a bit of a guide for that. Can you tell us a little bit about the ebook that you have available?
Yep, absolutely. So it's like I said, it's sort of born from we seeing a lot of the same questions from a lot of customers around this. So we decided just make an ebook around it. It's available from the Terra Team website. I think you'll probably have a link somewhere for it.
Yep.
Um, and what we've actually talked about today is just all what chapter 1 is about, and that's really about like analyzing the risk, getting stakeholders involved, how to plan things through, what to look for. Honestly, I forgot how many chapters there are, but it's more than one. So there's plenty in the book to help you at all stages of planning and executing on a migration, and not just technical sides, but also like how to talk to people about it, how to get stakeholders involved, how to communicate about it, and all that.
Hmm. Well, like you said, this is just chapter one of multiple chapters, and this is just episode one of this conversation. I'll be back in a month to talk with another one of the contributing authors to the ebook. I've shared the link to the ebook in the discussion, the comments in LinkedIn and YouTube. So if you're interested, click on the link and you can get your free copy of the ebook from Terra Team. I have had the pleasure to read through it, and I think it's very well written and structured. And you might think so too. Maybe you'll find it
Thank you
helpful.
very much. High praise.
Malcolm, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure to talk to you as always.
Thank you so much as well. I can't wait to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I hope you also found it informative. If you did, let me know. And you can always reach me on LinkedIn. Really, that's it these days. I stay off of the Twitters and the Reddits. So find me on LinkedIn and let me know what you thought. Until next time, stay healthy, stay safe out there. And thank you again, everybody.